Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session on TPP, a very, very topical subject for us here in Thailand and in the region. So that there's enough time for the speakers to tell us about this very important topic, let me begin by inviting Ms. Kristina to the podium to tell us about TPP, overview of the TPP, its key provisions, and then we might have some follow-up questions for you. Thank you very much.
Okay, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming today. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd first like to thank Dr.Supavud for putting together or for introducing this panel and hosting us here. I'd also like to thank the Thailand Stock Exchange, Patra Securities, and Bank of America Merrill Lynch for hosting this timely event and inviting me to participate. And of course, it's a great honor to share the floor with Dr. Duenden, whose work at TDRI I have admired for a long time. So it's very timely for us to be here today to talk about U.S. trade with the Asia Pacific. We've had some very eventful months in October and November. 2 weeks ago, President Obama and leaders from the Asia Pacific region concluded an APEC summit in Manila and an ASEAN summit in Malaysia that touched on just about every facet of the Asia Pacific economy. Just a few examples from APEC include the use of electric vehicles, the digital economy, advertising standards, sustainable development, entrepreneurship, disaster preparedness that can affect supply chains. When taken together, the many work streams of APEC and ASEAN are helping advance the broad Asia-Pacific economy. And then, of course, on October 5th, the 12 TPP trading partners concluded the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement after 5 years of negotiation. And on November 5th, the full text of the agreement, which numbers in the thousands of pages, so if you want some interesting reading, you can download it and work through it. I have not worked through the whole thing, I will confess. It was made public. And anyone who would like to see it can download it. It's available at www.ustr.gov and many other websites. From a U.S. perspective, our active engagement in APEC and ASEAN and the conclusion of TPP negotiations demonstrate that rebalancing U.S. foreign policy towards the Asia-Pacific remains a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy. One of the three pillars of the rebalance, an open and transparent economic environment, has seen real progress as we go into 2016. So looking at TPP, our view is that TPP links together countries that represent nearly 40% of global GDP. Its ambitious commitments will strengthen existing trade and investment ties among TPP partners, boost economic growth, help create jobs and opportunity, and deepen economic integration throughout the region. It's an important agreement both for the concrete liberalization that it will bring about, but also it's a model, in our view, for future trade agreements. TPP represents a new kind of trade agreement that does not just eliminate barriers to trade, but also serves as an important instrument to raise standards throughout the entire region. These include strong and enforceable commitments on labor rights, environmental protection, promoting a free and open internet, and protecting intellectual property rights. One example of this are labor commitments under TPP. Members commit to recognize freedom of association and the right to collectively bargain. This would mean significant positive process among some TPP members on labor rights. TPP also addresses important new emerging issues in international trade. These include ensuring a level playing field for a level playing field for companies that compete with state-owned enterprises, preventing barriers to digital commerce, and promoting seamless trade through regulatory coherence and good regulatory practices. The recently released text of the agreement is useful reading for all of our trading partners because it sets out the elements that the United States believes need to be at the heart of 21st century trade and economic liberalization. So, with that background, I wanted to spend the rest of my time answering some of the questions for you that I've heard from around Bangkok and the region on TPP since its conclusion. So the first question I often hear is, what's next? What's next on TPP? Each of the 12 TPP parties will now turn to their respective domestic approval processes. On November 5th, the President Obama, notified Congress of his intent to sign the TPP agreement in 90 days, consistent with the requirements set forth in our Trade Promotion Authority legislation. That notification started the formal process for review and approval of the agreement by the U.S. Congress. The administration will continue consulting closely with Congress on the timeline for congressional consideration. Meanwhile, other countries will complete their own ratification processes. TPP will enter into force following the completion of domestic approval processes by the TPP parties, as outlined in the agreement. Once they have all completed their domestic legal procedures, or, interestingly, when 6 of the original 12 signatories, which together account for 85% of the combined gross domestic product of the original signatories, have completed their procedures. What this says is that if there is one country who cannot ratify, that the agreement could still go forward. So the other question I've had frequently is, can other countries join, or how do other countries join TPP? Currently, there is not a mechanism for new members to begin negotiations, but when there is one developed, all 12 members will have to develop it together and agree to it. Our priority at the moment is to get the agreement through the respected processes of all of the current TPP members. Regional economies that are interested in joining may want to review the text and consider their readiness to adopt TPP's ambitious commitments. We and other TPP members are happy to answer any country's questions about the agreement to help them better align their economies with the agreement. We consider TPP to be consistent with other trade agreements, and we continue to be committed to a robust and effective WTO system. We'll continue working closely with our partners in WTO and are, of course, recognizing other trade agreements like bilateral trade agreements among countries. Another question I often get is, what about sensitive sectors in TPP? It's important to realize that our partners, our 12 TPP partners, represent a very diverse group of economies in different stages of development. There are large economies like Japan. There are small economies like Brunei or New Zealand. There are advanced economies like Singapore and emerging economies like Vietnam or Peru. But this diverse group was able to reach agreement by keeping sight of the potential benefits to be gained by all. A good example of one of the sectors that is particularly relevant in the region and to Thailand is the treatment of pharmaceuticals. There is concern among the public, certainly in Thailand from what I hear, that TPP will limit accessibility to affordable medicines. But a close reading of the agreement that the 12 TPP members all supported shows that a careful balance was struck that ensures access to medicines, but also promotes strong intellectual property protection that provides incentives for innovation. Both of these elements are vital to ensure the health of this generation and the next generation. To be more specific, the agreement eliminates tariffs on medicines and medical devices, helping lower costs for hospitals, clinics, aid organizations, and consumers. For the first time in any trade agreement, TPP requires the parties to tighten enforcement on counterfeit drugs that threaten consumer health and safety. TPP strengthens health and medicine supply systems throughout the region by promoting government transparency and due process standards in the sector. It explicitly recognizes the Doha Declaration on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights and Public Health, which affirms the rights of countries to take measures to protect public health. I would leave as my final thoughts that the agreement is long and detailed. And those countries not at the negotiating table are still looking through the details, engaging the terms of the agreement and how it might impact them. The United States is confident that implementing TPP will be a net win for all 12 members and actually for the Asia-Pacific economy as a whole as the economy continues to grow under TPP ratification. So with that, I'll end my remarks, and should I stay at the podium for the questions or come
Yes,
back?
please.
Okay.
I do have a couple of follow-up questions. First of all, you had mentioned in your remarks that the President has notified Congress of his intention to sign the agreement on the 5th of November, and that this starts the 90-day process. Can we imply from that that the Congress needs to take action and ratify, say by February of next year, or could the timetable be extended for longer?
Sure, maybe I can give a little more detail on what our own ratification process is. Of course, the ratification process is different for every TPP member. For us, first the President signs the agreement in 90 days after he notified it. Then there will be produced a study which will be provided to Congress on the economic impacts in the United States of TPP for Congress's use in debating the agreement. Then Congress will take up the agreement and run through its process. Our Trade Promotion Authority Act, which has passed not too long ago and sets up certain provisions for putting trade agreements through Congress, does have a timeline that Congress has to follow in terms of getting the agreement through. So the timetable could be quicker than that, but there is sort of an end timetable for that. We don't know exactly how long it will take. We're certainly working closely with Congress, though, to answer all their questions to get us through as quickly as possible.
But with the holidays coming and so on and so forth, would the timing be, say, first quarter or second quarter of next year?
Yeah, I can't really speculate. I'm not an expert on Congress, and they run their own process, so it's a little early to speculate how quickly they'll run it through.
I do have another related question, and then maybe Dr. Duenden might want to ask something as well. You mentioned about the TPP coming to effect if 6 of 12 were to successfully ratify, or 85% of combined GDP. That does imply to me that if the U.S. fails to ratify, the entire TPP goes away.
If the U.S. represents a large enough chunk of total GDP, then the answer to that would be yes. The United States would need to ratify for TPP.
Yes. So it seems to me that my math says U.S. and Japan, either U.S. and Japan have to ratify. Thank you. Dr. Duenden, do you have some follow-up questions?
I just have one question. I guess this would be a question that probably addressed the concerns of most developing countries, including Thailand. You mentioned that there is certain flexibility in the negotiation process. So perhaps maybe you can help us illustrate a little bit what kind of flexibility mechanism is embedded in the TPP so that countries with less developed, economically developed can tailor it to suit its level of development. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good question. So every individual TPP country, when they negotiated their own set of rules. So although there is an overarching set of rules in TPP, there are also, because every economy has a different situation when it comes in, there were a set of agreements that each country developed on its own, independently. Those are included, by the way, in the annexes of the TPP agreement. It's one of the reasons the TPP agreement is so long, because there are 12 different annexes. So in their negotiations, countries that had particular sectors that they felt would take longer to transition to TPP standards, negotiated those in the agreement, those transition periods. So for autos, for instance, there are some countries that have longer transition periods in terms of opening up their sectors than others. And in that way, there was some flexibility in the sense that the countries could say, okay, this is a real priority for us. We'd like extra flexibility here, whereas other countries might have asked for flexibility in a different sector. So that if you read the annexes, you'll see that some countries did get considerable flexibility in some of the provisions.
If I may, just one follow-up question,
Okay.
one last one. You mentioned that a study will be presented to the Congress. I assume that's by the International Trade Commission.
That's right.
Would that be public information? Can other countries use that as well?
That's a good question. I suspect I know the answer, but I don't know it for sure, so I'd prefer not to speculate since I wouldn't want to be misquoted. So I will not make a comment on that. But if Congress receives it, I think normally it's available. I think.
Well, thank you so much, and let me at this time now invite Dr. Duenden to the podium. Thank you, and give us the perspective from the Thai side. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I have my presentation here. Okay, I guess, okay, there you go. Thank you. I would like to thank the host organizations, and it's an honor to be speaking here with Kristina, whom we are both well acquainted, and thank you, Dr.Supavud. Today I will present the view of Thailand. Must be very preliminary, because actually this is even before they agreed, even before TDRI prepared for the assessment, even before the actual text was released. And when the actual text was released, I thought I would update this, but then it was 1,000 pages. So I decided, I tried to review it, and I think most of the text was leaked by WikiLeaks anyway. Certain chapters, like intellectual property rights, the entire chapter was leaked. Anyway, we relied on leaked information, which was pretty accurate. Okay. Okay. Our TDRI key message, our assessment, is that we like to tell the story, and the story is why it's very important, why TPP is very important to Thailand. And this link to our export performance that is lackluster for the past few years. Our FDI figures is also going down. So it's very important that Thailand needs to secure new markets. And therefore, TPP does matter to us. It's a major agreement that if we are not member, it's likely to impact. But then again, we recognize that there are certain concerns of proponents of this agreement. So it's something that we need to really dig deep into the agreement and do a very thorough assessment to be fair to all those who advocate and those who oppose the agreement. So it's all the information that will be important to to make our decision. So let me begin just say how important this is to us. We must recognize that Thailand export performance has been declining very rapidly. Only 5 years ago did our export used to grow over 20% a year. Just over a few periods, as you can see, that it slides from 10 to 15 and now in the negative for the last 2 years. So this is a very big drop over a very short time. And what is more worrying is if we look at the markets, it's all negative. Our exports to most markets are negative except for only 2 bright spots, which is the United States and the CLMV countries. But then we can say, oh, it's okay, everybody is doing just as bad as Thailand, because the economy is bad, the global economy is bad. Well, if you look at the Thai market share in the world export market share, we can see that our share did shrink a little bit, from 1.26% of the global export to 1.22. If you remove gold and oil, it's 1.34. So there is some decline in Thailand's market share. That means we are doing worse than the average. Okay, and if you look at the sectoral level, you can also see that, as you can see this chart. What does it tell you? The vertical axis tells you the market share. Are we gaining market share? Or are we losing market share? Okay, so the vertical axis, that means we're gaining market share in the world for electronic appliances and automotive. So that's good news. We are market share. But then the horizontal axis shows whether that particular product market is growing or shrinking. So both automatic and electrical appliance has very low growth, 2 to 3%, and electronics only 0 to 1%. So what I'm saying that we are growing in a shrinking market, and we're shrinking in the growing market. And the growing markets are telecom equipments, over 7% a year, integrated circuits, textile, and agriculture. So this is a worrying sign for Thailand. But then we can say, it's okay, it's just the way we are now, but future may not be the same. Maybe we have R&D and we have technology, then we can gain shares in advanced industries like IT or whatever that was mentioned. But then again, when we look at FDI figures, it's worrying again. As you can see that FDI flow into Thailand as a share has also declined. And what's more worrying is the manufacturing share has declined. As you can see, the purple part is shrinking. Thailand is no longer attracting manufacturing FDI. It's all services. And services is not greenfield. If you look at the investment in services, they are mergers and acquisitions. Baybank, the very big ticket item, and the acquisition of certain insurance companies. So they are not greenfield investment. So this is worrying that Thailand manufacturing sector, which is our major engine of growth, is not attracting FDI. So how can we continue to rely on our manufacturing asset of growth? And if we compare the global share, if we compare to our neighbors, the picture is even more dismal because you can see that Malaysia's share of the global FDI has increased from 0.52 to 0.78. The Philippines, the share has doubled. Indonesia, the share has tripled over the same period. And Vietnam, the share has more than tripled, almost tripled. So you can see our neighboring countries is enjoying greater share of FDI. ASEAN is a sweet spot in the FDI market, minus Thailand. So now we don't have FDI, we have problems now. Can we look future to our market? Can we be confident about that we can secure market in the future? But again, Thailand has signed about 12 FTAs. But since the year 2010, we haven't signed any major FTAs. Since then, we signed 2 FTAs, Peru and Chile. The value of the trade with Peru and Chile each year is only $300 million or 0.3% of our trade. Not even 1%, less than 1%. So these are very insignificant trade partners. So if we look at the share of Thailand, share of our total export that goes to our FTA member countries, it's only about 50%, the red line. As you can see, it stalled after signing agreement with Australia in 2005 and signing with Japan in the year 2007. Since then, we haven't had any major FTAs. Whereas Singapore, the purple line, you can see that over 70% of Singapore's exports go to an FTA country. And it's almost going to be more than that because Singapore just concluded FTA with the EU, another major partner. So it's going to go to 90%. Whereas Thailand will stall at 50%. Okay, so, and it's also lower than Malaysia, as you can see. So that is why TPP will be important because we have a major partner, which is the United States, which is the destination. About 10% of our export goes to the United States. What will happen? We know that Malaysia and Vietnam are part of the TPP. So Vietnam currently only about 45% of Vietnamese exports goes to an FTA countries with Vietnam. But after signing the TPP, that share going to increase to, I think, over 70%. So it's going to be a big jump for Vietnam. Okay. It will also be a smaller jump for Malaysia, okay, from 60 to about 70%. So these 2 countries is going to have better access to market. Whereas Thailand, if we sign 2 agreements with Chile and Peru, and future is Turkey and Pakistan. This is in the pipeline. Again, Turkey and Pakistan will not help Thailand opening too much of a market. So what I'm saying that we're signing a lot of FTAs, but they're not contributing to opening new markets for us. They are very small markets. But then again, people will say, it's okay. There are 12 members in the TPP. 9 of them already have FTA with Thailand. Okay, so you can see it's true. Out of 12 members TPP countries, only 3 countries we don't have an FTA yet, which is the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And these 3 countries combined contribute to about 10% of our trade and about 10% of our FDI. So we say it doesn't matter, only 3 countries out of 12 countries. But again, you have to realize that the FTAs we have with 9 TPP members are not as broad and not as deep as the TPP. It mainly concentrates only on tariffs reduction. It does not include very little service liberalization. It does very little on investment liberalization, financial, telecom markets. So the depth is very different. Okay, so it's hard to compare to say that we already have FTAs with 9 countries because it's a different level of FTAs, advancement of agreements. Most people will come to TDRI and ask, are we going to gain or lose from TPP? I think there is no agreement that you can only gain. So it's nothing wrong if you say we're going to lose from signing TPP agreement. Of course you're going to lose, but on what aspect? Okay, of course, maybe we'll lose on IPR, maybe we'll lose on other things, but again, you will gain from something as well. I don't think even agreement, if you gain everything on every chapter, 30 chapters, nobody's going to sign an agreement with you. That's mean the other side is losing everything as well. So I think it's balancing the gains and the balancing the loss. This is preliminary assessment that we think example of that, what we'll gain and lose. Auto, if we do not become members, is a yellow light, meaning that we're going to lose, but it's phased-in period. It's a long time. Auto is about 30 years, 20 to 30 years. So it's phased in. Textile, I think, is going to be hit very hard. Okay, services will be hit in a negative as well, and as well as agriculture, but probably not as extreme as textiles. Investment, FDI can be diverted to countries that have TPP because they have investment protection. And intellectual property rights is one thing that TDRI thinks that maybe not signing we will gain rather than lose. And labor standards. But the other ones we think we'll lose. This is just preliminary. Okay, we're not saying this is the case, but just from a very quick assessment. And let's look, the key market TPP is the United States. Okay, because we don't have an FTA with the United States. Look at the moment of the Thai situation in the U.S. market. The blue dots is Thai exports to the United States. The vertical axis is the share of U.S. exports. That means how much we rely on the U.S. Okay, for the export. And the horizontal axis is also the average growth of the exports. So you can see that Thailand, Thai exports, textiles, garment, and agriculture on the left-hand side, okay, it's those that are actually registering negative growth already. And they are registering negative growth and very low market share. So already you can see that except for automotive parts, Thailand exports to the US is already declining year on year. You cannot compare to Vietnam. Vietnam is a big bubble. The size of the bubble is the value of the export. Vietnam's textile export to the United States is many times larger than Thailand, and it's growing at around 16% a year, and the market share is about 10% of the US market. So Vietnam is already big, and it's going to get even bigger with the TPP. What are the products at risk for Thailand? This is just for textile. We have to go through a lot. But US still has a high tariffs on certain products. It's still not the zero. The high tariffs, for example, are prepared preserved tunas, still about 11%. Men's knitted trousers are still 21%. So these are going to be hit hard because Vietnam and Malaysia will have zero tariffs, whereas Thai exporters will be subject to these tariff levels. Let us look specifically at automotive because this is one of the biggest Thailand's export. Okay, the automotive industry is very sensitive. Okay, because Japan the major manufacturer is part of the TPP. But the thing is, if Japan wants to export cars from Japan into the US using Thai parts, then it depends on what you call the rule of origin. So how many % of the supply has to come from TPP countries? Japan wanted 30% so that Japan can source from Thailand a lot. Whereas Canada and Mexico wants 60% because they don't want Japan to source from Thailand. They want Japan to source from Canada or Mexico. So in the end, it ended up with 45 to 55. So I think this means that if Japan wants auto to go tariffs-free into the US, it can only source certain part from Thailand, not as much as it used to. However, I did interview Japanese JETRO, and they did say that as it stands, there's very few cars that exports to the US from Japan using Thai parts. But nevertheless, this is a concern that whether if Thailand is not a member, sourcing from Thailand will be limited if Thailand is not a member of TPP. We looked whether Thailand exports any cars to the US, still very little. Okay, at the moment, directly to the US, very little. But it's growing. We used to export very little, a few 1-ton pickup trucks. Thailand is the center of the biggest producer in the world. But very little, only $3 or $4 million a year. But what is rising to the US, as you can see the chart, is the eco car. Eco car export to Thailand, to the US and Canada has been rising in numbers. This is certainly subject to 2.5% tariff rates. It's not too high, so it's not too bad, this one, because it's only 2.5. Trucks is 14.5%. But again, this 2.5% will be phased in over a long period of time. I think the US is 25 or 30 years. Canada is shorter. Mexico is shorter. The impact on textile, as I mentioned, will be hit hard because it comes immediately. It does not have a phase-in period like the auto parts. The one that will be most hit will be those that is certainly currently subject to very high tariff rate. The vertical axis show the tariff rates. So men knitted trousers are subject to tariff rates over 20%. So those are going to be hit hard. And the horizontal axis are those that are most reliant on US market. The ones, men knitted trousers, 70% of Thailand exports of men knitted trousers goes to the United States. That means 70% of our exports of this category is going to be hit hard because it will be subject to 20% tariffs, whereas our competitors, Malaysia, Vietnam, will be 0 tariffs. So the ones these are the most going to be the most affected. So we can also tell who's going to be affected. I think the investment will also have impact on us because we don't have investment agreement with the United States. So finally, my last slide said, what can we do given that we're not part of the TPP and we probably won't be able to accede into the agreement, at least I think for the next 2 years, at least 2-3 years. So there's been discussion a lot whether RCEP is the way out. RCEP is ASEAN plus 6. Plus India, plus China, plus Japan, Korea, India, very big, if we can sign this. But I interviewed both Japan, JETRO, and KOTRA, and Korean. Both of them don't have very positive views with RCEP. They think it's going to be slow moving, not a substitute for TPP, really. I think another option is if we cannot go to TPP, then Thailand should look into Thailand-EU free trade agreements, which was ongoing and stopped for a while, okay? Another opportunity for us is make better use of existing FTA privileges. We sign a lot of FTAs with many people, but we never study why people are not using the agreements. These are the rates of privilege usage. As you can see, ASEAN is very low. We already eliminated those that use BOI incentives and those that are 0 tariffs already. We already eliminated those. These are percentage of those that should gain from using the privilege, but they're not using it. ASEAN, only 38.9% of exporters who should use it. Why? Why 62% doesn't use it? And I think it's from our TDRI study, preliminary study, because a lot of people don't even know it. And if they do, it's very expensive. It's called the Form D that you have to fill out. Very complicated, very time consuming. So this is something that you can actually easily harvest without having to make new FTAs, but just make the existing ones more user-friendly, and so people can use it more. Or for our textiles, we can consider relocation to Vietnam, because Vietnam is already going to be a place where they can send their products tariff-free to the United States. So our textile will either have to move to Vietnam. China has already moved in. A lot of things in the free trade agreements, the TPP, I find it's good for Thailand. I'm not talking about liberalization. I'm talking a lot about governance, rules, and regulations that is required in the TPP. For example, the TPP required member countries to have effective competition policy. Everybody knows competition policy is good for any country. Why do we need TPP to tell us have your competition policy work out? Why can't we implement our own competition policy? I don't know why, but 17 years, we still haven't implemented our competition law. So I think a lot of things in the TPP is good governance, and we should actually implement it unilaterally. Don't need to wait for TPP. If you think it's good for you, then do it. And in the end, I think it's also important to shift the export strategy from a supply-oriented to a demand one. This is something that the private business is talking a lot, that in the end, I think maybe we're putting too much hope or too much effort about TPP. We're ignoring the structural problem of the Thailand industry. And I think TPP is about market, but we also have to have good products to sell into the markets. And I think our key focus at the moment is on how to restructure the Thai industry. And TPP, the market, is secondary. Thank you.
Kristina, would you like to do the honors? First question.
Thank you, Dr. Duenden. That was excellent. And it sounds to me like you have a pretty strong case for it being beneficial for Thailand to consider joining TPP. I'd be interested in your view on what the most difficult challenge would be for Thailand to join. What would be the sector that would be the most difficult to liberalize?
As you know, for most FTAs in Thailand, the most debatable issue is the intellectual property rights. And that is because we have a group of people who are very concerned, which is valid, concerned about the price of Medicare. I think we need to make this issue a public debate, an educational debate. What is the cost? We really have to break down what is the cost of implementing the TPP chapter on intellectual property rights, data, exclusivity or whatever. We really have to make it comprehensible to the public what it's all about. Because I think most people don't know what's in the IP chapter, but they know it's bad. It's going to be bad for the time. But what exactly is it? It's 5 years, it's 8 years, data exclusivity. It's very complicated. I read a little bit about it. And so copyright protection from 50 years to 70 years, what does it mean? If Mickey Mouse protection increased from 60 to 70 years, what does it mean for Thailand? What are the implications? I think in the end, we have to have an educational debate, not emotional, but really dig down on information. This is the agreement. This is how it's going to impact. I think certain health research institutions has come up with a number that they calculated that will lead to higher price of medicine. I think it's in the billions of dollars. But again, we can have an open debate. Take that as a beginning, that this is what they think is going to impact, and you can look into whether this is a realistic. And then the gains is obvious, as I presented you, but the cost, I think we still need to work out. So I just hope that, I don't want it to be emotional, but we debate on the facts and figures.
I just want to follow up a little bit. I think it was on page 18 where you gave FTA utilization. And I wondered why the Australian and the Japanese one, the utilization was quite high. Presumably the documentation should be as complicated whether you do it for ASEAN or for Australia and Japan.
The literature reviews on utilization of FTAs says that the usage depends mainly on the cost is given. Countries that have very problematic, the cost may be 3 to 4% of the value of the goods. That means if your preference margin is below 4%, you're not going to use it. Okay. But another important factor is the size of the import or export, because it's a fixed cost. So if you're a big company, it's worthwhile to go through the problems of filling Form D, because your lot, when you import, it's a very big lot, or when you export, is a big lot. So the size of the importer, and Australia are the cars companies. So they are very large companies, so they're willing to go through any Form Ds. But if it's SMEs, they're not going to use it. First, they may not know it. Second, it may not worth it for them because their value of imports is so small. It's not worth it to go through the process. So it's a composition.
Or it could mean that there's opportunity for government to help SMEs in this area.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me have the last 10 minutes of the session to allow Ms. Kristina to have her final remarks, and Dr. Duenden as well on the points other points you want to raise. Thank you.
Thank you. I won't have 10 minutes of final remarks, but maybe I'll just make it 5. Yeah. So maybe I could just follow up on some of the information that Dr. Duenden presented, which really to me was fascinating, and I hope I can have a copy when we're finished. Because I really think that ultimately any country that wishes to join TPP has to do its homework, has to look at what the agreement actually says, apply it to the situation in the country at present, and then do some analysis to find out what the real cost of joining would be. We've heard anecdotally some Thais who are trade experts who have looked at the agreement say, oh, you know what, this isn't as bad as we had feared. In fact, some of these are quite flexible, and we think that we could work with these. So I do think that it's important for any country that's looking at joining TPP to take a careful look at the agreement and apply through rigorous analysis what the agreement would actually mean for their own country as they go through the process of educating the public and making government decisions on whether to join. Meanwhile, the United States and the 12 TPP partners look forward to working out our implementation ratification processes as quickly as possible. And we hope that by putting the agreement into effect, we can improve not only the economies of the 12, but really the economies of the whole region, because growth that comes to the region ultimately helps all of the countries in the region, not just those that are members of TPP. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And in that context, I would also like to again request that we get that ITC copy of that evaluation. And yes, thank you very much. And Dr. Duenden, again, your final remarks. I think you have another about 5 or so minutes.
I think for Thailand, I think this is a good opportunity because it's an agreement is different from other agreements because the text was not available. And when you try to hide something, people has fantasies about what is behind that. And I think this fantasy is creating a big monster out of TPP, but maybe because it was secret, it become a monster because people think, oh, this is very serious, we can't do it, because nobody really knows what's going on. And I think now it's available, so it's easier. Now you can see what you're going to get, at least, not exactly, but at least you see the text. So I heard from certain countries, for example, I interviewed somebody in Korea, and I asked them why Korea didn't join TPP. And basically the answer was that because of the car company in Korea, that was a monopoly. And they were afraid of Japan cars going into Korea under the TPP. That was it. Because they're afraid that if the tariffs went down, if you go to Korea, you won't see any Japanese cars. It's going to be flooded with Japanese cars. So they were scared of that. But when they saw the text, 30 years facing, they say, hey, we should have been there, So You know, this is the kind of thing that goes on. I think because now the text is available, we can access what is there on the table. So I think Thailand can now begin to assess, but I think more important is that I've been involved a lot with trade negotiations since the WTO days, and I have a feeling that when Thailand goes to negotiate, we don't have a mandate. We don't really know why. We just said no to everything, you know, and if we say yes to something, that means we're giving up something. But it's not the case. If you open up something, doesn't mean you're giving up something. Sometimes it's good for your economy. Sometimes you need that investment. Sometimes you need that new competition from overseas in particular sector. So I think it's very important that Thailand needs to think what we need. For example, you say, oh, financial liberalization, no, we don't want to open up. But you have to ask yourself, is the financial industry in Thailand competitive? Are Thais getting the best deals out of their financial institutions? You know, I think we need to ask these questions so that it's just not that view of that if we have to give up something, that means we open up something. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And as a representative of the financial sector in Thailand, I think we stand more than ready to open up. I think that at the end of the day, that's transaction cost for the Thai economy, and we need to keep that down. I just have a couple of other things to mention. Number one, there are chapters even on government procurement and anti-corruption. These are the things that I think Thailand also wants to pursue, and it's something, I think that's something that could be of interest to us as well. Finally, if I may share some of the points that you mentioned to me, Kristina, before, was that we had an FTA with the U.S. negotiations with the U.S. about 10 years ago, which unfortunately did not come to fruition. But you mentioned to me that a lot of the agreements that were reached in that FTA was a solution and put in part of the TPP. In other words, you know, there were certain things that we found, at least at the time, tentatively acceptable, that was crafted and used in the TPP. If that was the case, and President Obama also came to invite Thailand to join TPP in 2012, I think it's not beyond our reach, you know, if we wanted to try to see if we can get into this TPP. And with that, let me end the session. And again, thank you very much, the two panelists. And again, please join me in congratulating and giving them a big hand. Thank you.